Let me first of all thank President Robert for your remarks. I think those are exciting developments that are going on, the ones that we will all welcome here in Rochester. I'm going to take just the few minutes that I have to basically do two things, and one is to simply reflect, because I've been thinking about it mostly. I got home and thought about it all last night, Dr. Wilson's address, and because it really was very provocative. And then secondly, to say something about the reality of what the intersection of race, religion, and politics, especially at the end of this concluded campaign season, and what it might mean for us here in Rochester. Let me just take a moment to tell you about my own story. I don't normally do this, but I think it's important in this setting to have a sense of how you approach this topic. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in a neighborhood that was as segregated economically as it was racially. So I actually lived in a multiracial neighborhood, but of one social class, basically. And there were a social class, not necessarily economic class. There were people that made a lot of money. There were people that made very little money, but they could only live in one part of the city. So that's where we all lived. And in that setting, my father being a pastor and coming from a long line of preachers, I was raised with a combination of both racial pride and racial realism. And the pride was part of the subliminal messages that I heard from my father's pulpit on Sunday mornings, and the racial realism was what I faced every day as I tried to navigate life in that city. As a result of, I always say it's providence, because it was either providence or my parents, I don't know which one it was, but as a result of that, I was sort of snatched out of middle school in Detroit, or we called it junior high then. But I was snatched out of middle school, and I was deposited some 30 miles outside of Rochester, outside Detroit rather, in Bloomfield Hills, in a prep school for boys. And there I was introduced to a whole other side of life. And the results of that, as time goes on, has really been positive to me, because it started me very early reflecting on the nature and meaning of who I am and what race is. Just a second reflection I would share was that as I was finishing up my academic training at Union Theological Seminary in New York, we walked into class. This was a particular class taught by Professor James Cone, and we walked into class, and we sat down, and he said, "I have a book that I want you to read." And he wrote it down on the board, and the name of the book was The Declining Significance of Race. And we all took it, and our esteemed professor here was the author of that text. And needless to say, it dominated our discussions from that point on. But what it did was it raised, for us theological students, the element of dealing sociologically with the realities that we lived in. And so those were some formative experience. And then the last one was that while I was in New York City, I found myself the associate pastor of a small African-American church in the middle of a large Latino neighborhood in East Harlem. And I found myself having to minister in a multicultural setting, and one in which I had to deal with the elements of language. And then I would take the bus, or luckily sometimes I'd get a ride, but I'd take the bus straight up 125th Street to the other side of Manhattan, where I was in the rarefied atmosphere of Union Seminary and Columbia University. I bring those up because I think one of the things that we have come to understand is that all of our experiences around race have their differences. And I want to just share with you that just a comment on structure versus culture. And I've been thinking about this, as I said, most of the evening. And the first thing I want to say about that is that when we talk about culture, and I've been somewhat of an cultural essentialist most of my career, when I first heard that, I thought about, it's not culture, it's a distorted form of our culture. that elevates illegal activities and so forth, this distorted form of our culture. And I do believe that to be true in some cases. And what I'm saying is that there are elements in our culture that need to be lifted up. In a recent op-ed piece, I talked about the African communalism of Barack Obama, which I think has not been really investigated, and that one of the basic foundations of his vision is a kind of we-ness that can be rooted not simply in the constitutional we, but also in the African we. And I think that needs to be lifted up. Yet, I believe that Professor Wilson is right, that whatever positive aspects of African culture that we continue to carry along with us have been severely distorted and maybe even recreated by the structures of inequality. The structures of inequality have created nihilism in the streets and elitism on our campuses. It has created nihilism in our streets and elitism on our campuses. And it's one of the problems that we have in talking about race, is that the conversations that go on campus are not the conversations that go on in the neighborhoods. And so trying to talk to young men, as I do, try to talk to them on Dewey Avenue about race, about the recent election. There really wasn't until late a lot of energy around that. During the primary season, the rapper, 50 Cent, Curtis Johnson, I believe his name, I don't know his last name, was asked about the candidacy of Barack Obama. He said, "Who is Barack Obama?" And he represents a whole generation of people for whom their reality has nothing to do with the sort of high-level discussions that go on in the rest of our society. So we have to understand that we have to do something about that. I know my time is going short. My last comment has to do with race and religion and politics and the way in which these things coalesce in this particular election season. Like Mayor Johnson, I've had the good pleasure of knowing Reverend Jeremiah Wright for a good 25 years or so. And so this past season was difficult for those of us who know him, and to see his whole ministry sort of summed up in a 10-second soundbite was a very painful thing. But I think the real issue with that soundbite was that it was a glimpse into something that into black church life that most of America has never seen. And that the structures of segregation and separatism has allowed the development of a church culture in which prophetic denunciations of evil take place all the time. Those of us who heard that comment said that wasn't the worst thing we even heard Jeremiah Wright say. It was the worst thing we've heard in churches. But for the rest of America that does not see that, and whose lives have been shielded from that reality, that brief 10-second glimpse into what was happening in that particular church struck a nerve. So I think it is a wake-up call that there's something going on in which people are living a different reality than we think. And so I think that when we look at that, we have to understand that religion and race, especially when they coalesce, can be the most divisive forces among us, or they can be the most unifying forces among us. And I believe that President-elect Barack Obama is right, that the choice is ours.